Begzad had everything once: successful business, beautiful house, expensive car, a wife he loved deeply, and most importantly, peace. At least, that's what he believed. For years, he worked endlessly to build a comfortable life for his wife, Dilnoza. Long meetings, business trips, sleepless nights, stress, pressure. Everything felt worth it when he returned home and saw her smile. Because some men survive difficult life only through love. Begzad was one of those men. Dilnoza always looked elegant beside him, beautiful, confident, admired by everyone. People constantly called them the perfect couple, and maybe once they truly were. But life changes quietly sometimes, very quietly. One ordinary rainy evening, everything ended. Begzad drove home late after an exhausting meeting outside the city. Rain covered the highway heavily, visibility poor, headache aching from stress. His phone vibrated beside him. Dilnoza calling. Begzad smiled faintly while answering through Bluetooth. "Hey, beautiful." Dilnoza sounded irritated immediately. "How long will you take?" "Traffic is terrible," Begzad sighed tiredly. "I'll be home soon." Silence. Then she answered coldly, "You're always working." The sentence hurt slightly because he worked for them, for their future. Still, Begzad stayed calm. "I'm trying my best." Another silence. Then the line disconnected suddenly. Begzad stared at the dark road ahead quietly, and deep down, for the first time in years, he felt strangely lonely inside his own marriage. Minutes later, everything happened too fast. Bright headlights, a truck losing control on wet asphalt, screeching tires, metal exploding violently, glass shattering, pain. Then, darkness. Complete darkness. When Begzad finally opened his eyes again, everything smelled like hospitals. Machines beeped nearby, bright white lights burned his vision. His entire body hurt. But something felt wrong immediately, very wrong. He tried moving his legs. Nothing. Panic instantly exploded inside him. He tried again, harder. Still nothing. Heart racing wildly now. A doctor rushed toward him quickly. "Mr. Begzad, calm down." "My legs," Begzad whispered, terrified. No answer came immediately, and that silence told him everything already. Several painful hours later, the doctors finally explained the truth. Spinal damage, severe injuries, months of treatment ahead, maybe years, maybe never walking again. The world stopped, completely stopped. Because some sentences divide life into two parts forever, before and after. Dilnoza arrived at the hospital later that night. Perfect makeup ruined slightly by tears. Beautiful, shocked. At first, she cried beside his bed, holding his hand tightly. And seeing her there gave Begzad hope again, because he believed love survives tragedy. But deep down, neither of them understood yet that the accident had broken more than his body. It had also revealed the true strength of their marriage. And not every love survives suffering. The first few weeks after the accident felt unreal. Painkillers, hospitals, doctors, rehabilitation plans, endless medical conversations. And through all of it, Begzad kept holding on to one thing: Dilnoza. Because when life destroys a person physically, love becomes oxygen. At first, Dilnoza stayed beside him constantly, holding his hand, encouraging him, smiling through tears, telling everyone, "We'll get through this together." And hearing those words gave Begzad strength, real strength, because he truly believed her. But slowly, tiny changes began appearing, small at first, almost invisible. Dilnoza started arriving later to the hospital, then leaving earlier, answering messages constantly while pretending to listen, smiling less, touching him less, And somehow, Beckside felt it all immediately, because people in pain notice emotional distance faster than anyone else. One evening, during rehabilitation, Beckside painfully tried lifting himself up from the wheelchair alone. Sweat covered his face, hands shaking from effort. The therapist encouraged him patiently. "You're improving." But before Beckside can answer, he accidentally lost balance and fell hard onto the floor. Pain shot through his body instantly. Humiliation hurt even more. He heard quiet laughter nearby. Not cruel laughter, awkward laughter. Two nurses whispering nervously. Beckside closed his eyes in shame, because strong men suffered differently after losing independence. Moments later, Dilnoza entered the room, and instead of rushing toward him emotionally, she froze, watching him helpless on the floor beside the wheelchair. Something changed inside her eyes in that moment. Not disgust exactly, but fear. Fear of weakness, fear of burden, fear of the future suddenly standing in front of her. The therapist helped Becksad back into the chair quietly. Dilnoza forced a smile afterward, but it looked unnatural now, tired, distant. That night, inside the hospital room, Becksad finally asked softly, "Are you okay?" Dilnoza looked surprised. "Why?" "You seem unhappy." Silence. Long silence. Then she sighed quietly while looking out the window. Everything changed so fast. The words sounded harmless, but something in them frightened Beckside deeply, because suddenly he realized she wasn't talking about the accident anymore. She was talking about him. Weeks became months, and the emotional distance grew wider. Dilnoza stopped speaking about the future, stopped mentioning vacations, children, plans, dreams. Now, conversations focused only on schedules, medicine, hospital bills, problems. One evening, Becksad waited hours for her to visit, but she never came. No call, no message. Near midnight, he finally phoned her weakly. No answer. Again, nothing. Then finally, at almost 1 a.m., she texted, "Sorry, out with friends." Becksad stared at the message silently for a long time, because deep down, he already understood something painful. His wife was slowly leaving emotionally before leaving completely, and nothing hurt more than watching someone stop loving you little by little. A few days later, Becksad accidentally overheard something outside his hospital room. Dilnoza speaking quietly with her friend in the hallway. "I'm only 32. My whole life can't become hospitals and wheelchairs." Silence. Then her friend answered carefully, "But he's your husband." Dilnoza's voice cracked slightly afterward. "I know, but I didn't imagine my life like this." Those words destroyed something inside Becksad completely, not loudly, quietly, because suddenly he realized the terrifying truth. The woman he loved deeply was beginning to see him as a tragedy instead of a husband, and once love becomes pity, relationships start dying slowly. That night, Becksad cried alone silently after everyone left, not because of the wheelchair, not because of pain, but because for the first time since the accident, he truly felt abandoned. Rain fell heavily outside the rehabilitation center that evening. Dark clouds covered the city. Cold wind pressed softly against the hospital windows, and inside room 214, Beckzad sat alone, staring into darkness. The television played quietly nearby, but he wasn't watching, because lately his mind only repeated the same painful thoughts endlessly. Dilnoza's distance, her coldness, her exhaustion, and the terrifying feeling that love was slowly disappearing from her eyes. That fear hurt more than physical pain ever could. For weeks, Bekzad kept trying to save their marriage silently, pretending not to notice emotional distance, pretending not to hear disappointment in her voice, pretending not to see how uncomfortable she became near the wheelchair. Because sometimes people fight hardest for relationships already dying. That evening, Dilnoza arrived unusually late again. Elegant coat, perfect makeup, expensive perfume. Beautiful as always, but strangely, she no longer looked like home to him, only someone visiting briefly. Bekzad immediately sensed something different, something final. Dilnoza avoided eye contact while placing her bag quietly onto the chair. Then silence filled the room, long, heavy, dangerous. Finally, Bekzad asked softly, "What happened?" Dilnoza closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering courage for something terrible, then slowly sat down across from him, hands trembling slightly now. And suddenly, Bekzad understood everything before she even spoke, because deep down, human hearts recognize goodbye instinctively. "I can't do this anymore," Dilnoza whispered. The sentence shattered the room completely. Bekzad stopped breathing for 1 second, not from surprise, from heartbreak finally becoming real. Dilnoza began crying immediately afterward. Not fake tears, real ones, because leaving someone broken destroys part of the person leaving too. "I tried," she whispered desperately. "I really tried." Bekzad stared at her silently, his chest physically hurting now. "Is there someone else?" he asked quietly. Dilnoza froze, and that silence answered everything already. Bekzad slowly looked away toward the rain outside, because suddenly humiliation burned hotter than sadness. Not enough that he lost his legs, now he was losing his wife too. "There's a man," Dilnoza whispered shakily. "He's been helping me emotionally." Helping emotionally. Funny how betrayal always hides behind gentle words. Bekzad nodded slowly, almost calmly, too calmly, because pain this deep eventually becomes numbness. "Do you love him?" Bekzad asked softly. Dilnoza cried harder. "I don't know." The exact same cruel answer destroying relationships everywhere. Uncertainty, emotional escape, selfish confusion disguised as honesty. Bekzad lowered his head silently for several seconds, then quietly asked the question truly breaking him inside. "Would you leave if I could still walk?" Dilnoza immediately covered her face, crying, because both of them knew the truth already. The accident changed everything, not only physically, emotionally, socially, romantically. And somewhere along the way, Dilnoza stopped seeing her husband. She only saw limitation, responsibility, a future she no longer wanted. That realization destroyed Bekzad more completely than the crash itself, because strangers abandoning you hurts, but the person promising forever abandoning you changes something fundamental inside trust. "I'm sorry," Dilnoza whispered repeatedly through tears, but apologies sound small beside broken loyalty. Finally, Bekzad looked at her again, eyes full of pain now, real pain, and softly, with heartbreaking calmness, he asked, "When did you stop loving me?" Dilnoza cried silently. Long pause, then finally whispered, "When I became afraid of our future." Those words killed the last hope remaining inside him. Not anger, not screaming, only truth, cold truth. And sometimes truth destroys more permanently than cruelty ever could. A few minutes later, Dilnoza slowly stood up, still crying, still shaking, but already emotionally gone. She picked up her bag quietly, then walked toward the door. Bekzad watched silently, unable to stop her, unable to chase after her, and maybe that helplessness hurt most of all. Before leaving completely, Dilnoza turned back one final time, eyes full of guilt, fear, regret, but also relief. And that relief shattered Bekzad internally, because suddenly he realized she wasn't only leaving pain behind, she was escaping him. The door closed softly moments later, and inside the dark hospital room, Bekzad finally understood something devastating. The accident did not destroy his life in one night. It destroyed it twice. First his body, then his marriage. After Dilnoza left, something inside Bekzad completely shut down. Not dramatically, quietly, like a light slowly dying in an empty room. The next few days passed in silence. He stopped speaking much, stopped participating during therapy sessions, stopped answering friends' calls. Even food lost taste, because heartbreak changes the body too. The rehabilitation center suddenly felt colder now. Long white hallways, machine sounds, wheelchairs moving slowly past his door. Everything reminded him of loss. One evening, his therapist tried encouraging him gently again. "You were improving before." Bekzad stared blankly toward the window. What's the point now? The therapist had no answer, because sometimes people survive pain only when love waits for them afterward, and Bekzad no longer believed anyone waited anymore. That same night, while rain softly touched the hospital windows again, someone quietly entered his room carrying tea. A nurse, simple white uniform, tired eyes, warm expression. Her name tag read, Sabina. Bekzad barely looked up. "I'm not hungry." Sabina placed the tea near him anyway. "Good thing it's tea then," she answered softly. For the first time in days, Bekzad almost smiled slightly. Almost. Sabina didn't force conversation afterward, didn't ask painful questions, didn't give fake motivational speeches. She simply sat nearby silently while updating medical papers. And strangely, that quiet presence felt comforting, because grief becomes exhausting when everyone constantly tries fixing it. Sometimes people only need someone willing to stay beside the pain. Over the next few weeks, Sabina appeared often. Morning medicine, therapy assistance, late-night checkups, tiny, ordinary moments. But unlike others, she never treated Bekzad like a broken tragedy. She spoke normally, teased him sometimes, argued with him when he skipped exercises, and slowly, without realizing it, Bekzad began waiting for her visits. One afternoon, during physical therapy, Bekzad lost control of the wheelchair when transferring. He nearly crashed hard onto the floor again. Humiliation instantly burned through him. Patients nearby looked over. Bekzad clenched his fists angrily. "I hate this," he whispered. Not to anyone specifically, just life itself. Sabina quietly crouched beside him afterward, helping reposition the chair carefully, then softly said, "You're allowed to hate what happened." Bekzad looked at her surprised, because most people only told him to stay positive, fight harder, be grateful, but nobody acknowledged the anger, the grief, the unfairness. Sabina adjusted the wheelchair calmly, then added quietly, "But don't hate yourself, too." Those words hit him deeply, very deeply, because after the accident, Bekzad secretly began believing he was less of a man now, less worthy, less lovable. And somehow, this ordinary nurse saw pain nobody else noticed. One evening, during a power outage caused by heavy rain, the rehabilitation center became unusually quiet. Emergency lights glowed dimly through the hallway. Patients nervous, machines humming softly. Bekzad sat awake, unable to sleep. Then, suddenly, Sabina entered her room carrying candles and tea again. "You always appear with tea," Bekzad muttered faintly. Sabina smiled softly. People survive difficult nights better with warm hands. She handed him the cup carefully. Their fingers touched briefly. Small moment, but strangely, Bekzad felt warmth for the first time in months. Real warmth. Not pity, not obligation. Human warmth. Outside, rain continued falling across the dark city. Inside the dim hospital room, they talked quietly for hours. Not about the accident, not about Dilnoza, just life, childhood memories, funny stories, dreams. And slowly, something impossible began happening inside Bekzad. He laughed again, very softly but genuinely. Sabina noticed immediately, then smiled emotionally herself, because sometimes healing begins long before broken bones recover. Sometimes healing begins the moment someone reminds you you are still human after suffering. And neither of them understood yet that this quiet, rainy night inside a dark hospital room would eventually change both of their lives forever. Spring arrived slowly after the long, cold months. Rain became softer. Trees outside the rehabilitation center turned green again. And little by little, something inside Begzad began healing too. Not completely. Some wounds remain forever. But now, life no longer felt entirely dark, because every difficult day contained one thing he quietly waited for: Sabina. She still entered his room carrying tea sometimes, still argued with him during exercises, still refused to treat him like a helpless patient. And strangely, that ordinary kindness became the most important part of his day. One morning during therapy, Bekzad struggled badly again. His arms shook from exhaustion while trying to balance himself between support bars. Sweat covered his forehead. Pain burned through his back. Finally, frustration exploded. "I can't do this!" His voice echoed sharply across the room. Other patients turned briefly. Bekzad immediately felt ashamed afterward. But before humiliation could swallow him completely, Sabina stepped closer calmly, then quietly said, "You already are." Bekzad looked at her angrily. "No, I'm not." Sabina didn't step back, didn't titty him, didn't soften the truth. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes and answered, "Standing isn't the only way people become strong." Silence filled the therapy room, because suddenly, Bekzad realized something important. Sabina never measured him by what he lost, only by how he kept surviving. And after months of feeling broken, that kind of acceptance felt almost unbelievable. Days passed, then weeks, and gradually, Bekzad stopped thinking about Dilnoza every morning, stopped replaying the goodbye repeatedly, stopped checking old photos, because pain fades differently when kindness enters afterward. One evening, after a long, exhausting therapy session, Sabina pushed Bekzad's wheelchair outside into the hospital garden. Sunset painted the sky orange softly. Warm wind moved through the trees. Peaceful. For several minutes, they simply sat quietly watching birds fly above the city. Then suddenly, Bekzad asked softly, "Why are you so kind to me?" Sabina smiled faintly without looking at him. "Because I know what it feels like when life changes suddenly." Bekzad turned toward her slightly. "What happened?" Long silence. Then Sabina answered quietly, "My husband left after I lost our baby." Bekzad froze. Pain flashed briefly across her face now. He said, "I changed." Silence again. Heavy silence. Because suddenly, both understood each other in ways ordinary people never could. Abandonment, loss, being left behind during the worst moment of life. And somehow, shared pain created closeness words couldn't explain. That night, while returning inside, Bexad accidentally noticed other nurses whispering nearby. They'd look good together, one smiled quietly. Sabina rolled her eyes embarrassed, but Bexad, for the first time in many months, felt his heart react emotionally again. Not grief, not betrayal, something softer, hope. And that realization terrified him slightly, because loving again after heartbreak feels dangerous, very dangerous. A few days later, Bexad received unexpected visitors, old business partners, perfect suits, awkward smiles. At first, they pretended concern, but eventually, the real reason appeared. The company board wanted him to step down permanently. Investors no longer trusted a disabled leader. The word disabled hit like a knife, and suddenly, Bexad realized something painful again. The world respects success easily, but weakness makes people uncomfortable. After they left, Bexad sat silently staring at the floor, humiliated, angry, broken all over again. Then, quietly, Sabina entered carrying tea like always. She immediately noticed his expression. What happened? Bexad laughed bitterly. Turns out people only respect strong men. Sabina walked closer slowly, then crouched directly in front of his wheelchair and softly said the words changing everything inside him. No, pause. They respect convenient men. Bexad looked at her silently, and suddenly, for the first time since the accident, he felt seen completely, not as a patient, not as a burden, as a man still worthy of dignity. And somewhere deep inside, Bexad realized something beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The woman who stayed beside him during his darkest days was slowly becoming the reason he wanted to live fully again. Months passed quietly after that, and little by little, Bexad changed. Not magically, not perfectly, but deeply. The angry, broken man sitting alone in darkness after Dilnoza left slowly disappeared. Now he smiled more often, worked remotely again, trained harder during therapy. Even the doctors noticed the difference. "Your progress improved dramatically," one therapist said proudly. But deep down, Bexad knew the truth already. Hope heals people differently, and Sabina had quietly brought hope back into his life. Meanwhile, their connection continued growing naturally. No dramatic confessions, no forced romance, just small moments. Tea during rainy nights, long conversations in hospital gardens, laughter during difficult exercises, silence that felt peaceful instead of lonely. And for the first time since the accident, Bexad no longer felt ashamed of himself, because Sabina never looked at him with pity, only respect. One warm evening after finishing therapy, Bexad and Sabina sat together outside near the hospital fountain again. The sunset painted soft golden light across the garden. Beautiful, quiet. Then suddenly, Sabina smiled while watching him carefully. "You laugh differently now." Bexad looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "You used to laugh like someone apologizing for existing." Silence. Then, softly, she added, "Now you sound alive again." Those words touched something deep inside him, because suddenly Bexad realized how close he came to emotionally disappearing forever after Dilnoza left, and how this ordinary woman quietly pulled him back toward life again. But fate wasn't finished testing him yet. One afternoon, while leaving rehabilitation with Sabina beside him, Bekzad suddenly froze near the hospital entrance because standing beside a black luxury car was Dilnoza. Elegant as always, beautiful coat, perfect makeup, but her eyes looked different now, tired, regretful, and the moment she saw Bekzad beside another woman, pain flashed clearly across her face. Real pain. Sabina immediately sensed tension. "Do you want me to go?" she asked softly. Bekzad looked at her for one brief second, then quietly answered, "No." Simple word, but it changed everything, because months ago he would have hidden emotional truth immediately. Now he no longer wanted to protect the woman who abandoned him. Dilnoza slowly approached them nervously, and for the first time since the divorce, Bekzad noticed something shocking. She looked lonelier than he remembered. "Can we talk?" she whispered softly. Bekzad nodded once. Sabina stepped aside respectfully near the garden path, not jealous, not insecure, calm, because real loyalty does not fear honesty. Dilnoza stared at Bekzad silently for several painful seconds, then finally whispered, "You look better." Funny sentence, considering she once left believing his life was over. Bekzad answered calmly, "I am better." Those words visibly hurt her, because suddenly Dilnoza understood something terrifying. He survived without her. More than survived, he healed, and she was no longer the center of his world. Tears slowly filled her eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered shakily. Bekzad stayed silent, because some truths no longer need discussion. Dilnoza continued desperately, "I was scared. I thought everything was ruined. I thought our future died after the accident." Bekzad looked at her quietly, then softly asked, "So you left before I became too heavy to carry?" Dilnoza cried harder, because both knew the answer already. Silence filled the hospital entrance heavily. Then Dilnoza looked toward Sabina standing nearby. Pain flashed again across her face. "She stayed?" Dilnoza whispered. Bekzad followed her gaze calmly. "Yes." Only one word, but somehow that single word destroyed Dilnoza emotionally, because suddenly she fully understood the difference between herself and Sabina. One woman loved comfort, the other loved the person, and life had exposed both hearts clearly through suffering. Dilnoza stepped closer shakily. "Can we try again?" The question hung painfully between them. Months earlier, Bekzad would have given anything to hear those words. Now he only felt sadness, because sometimes people return after another person had already helped heal the damage they caused. Bekzad looked Dilnoza gently, not angrily, not cruelly, then quietly answered, "You came back after the hardest part was already over." Tears rolled down Dilnoza's face instantly, because deep inside, she knew he was right. He abandoned him during darkness, then returned once light appeared again, and love built that way never survives. After that conversation, Dilnoza never came back again. No more calls, no more messages, no more promises spoken too late. And strangely, Bekzad felt no anger anymore, only peace. Because sometimes closure arrives quietly, not through revenge, not through punishment, but through clarity. For months after the accident, Bekzad believed losing his legs destroyed his life. But now he understood something deeper. The accident did not only take things away, it also revealed truth. Who truly loved him, who only loved comfort, who stayed, who ran. And painful truth is still better than beautiful lies. Meanwhile, his recovery continued improving slowly. Doctors remained surprised by his determination. Daily therapy, exercise, discipline. Small victories becoming bigger over time. One afternoon, inside the rehabilitation center gym, Bekzad stood for several seconds using support bars. Not perfectly, not steadily, but standing. The entire room became emotional instantly. Therapists clapped proudly, patients smiled, and across the room, Sabina quietly wiped tears from her eyes because she remembered the man who once whispered, "What's the point now?" Now, he was fighting for life again, not because someone abandoned him, because someone stayed. That evening, Bigzad and Sabina sat together in the hospital garden one final time before his discharge. Warm summer wind moved softly through the trees. Peaceful sunset, the same place where broken conversations once slowly became healing. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then suddenly, Bigzad looked at her quietly and asked, "Why didn't you leave too?" Sabina smiled faintly, because difficult moments show people's real hearts. Silence. Then softly she added, "And yours stayed kind even after pain." Those words hit Bigzad deeply, because after betrayal, many people become cruel, cold, bitter. But somehow, despite everything, he still wanted to remain human. And maybe that saved him more than therapy ever could. Months later, Bigzad officially left the rehabilitation center, not fully healed, maybe never fully healed physically, but emotionally, he was stronger than before the accident ever happened. His business slowly recovered too. New projects, new goals, new purpose. And through all of it, Sabina remained beside him, quietly, naturally, without drama, without conditions. One rainy evening, almost a year after the crash, Bigzad and Sabina stood together near the large windows inside his new apartment, city lights glowing beautifully outside, rain touching the glass softly. Funny how rain no longer felt painful anymore. Bigzad looked at Sabina silently for several long seconds, then finally whispered, "You saved my life." Sabina shook her head gently. "No." She smiled softly afterward. "You decided to live again yourself." And suddenly, Bigzad realized something powerful. Real love does not appear only during beautiful moments. Real love reveals itself during suffering, during weakness, during the days when staying becomes difficult. Because anyone can love success, luxury, comfort, but only rare people love wounded hearts without running away. Outside, rain continued falling softly across the glowing city. Inside, Bigzad quietly held Sabina's hand, not dramatically, not desperately, peacefully. And after losing almost everything, he finally understood one beautiful truth. Sometimes the worst day of your life secretly leads you toward the people who truly belong beside you. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Real love is not tested during luxury and comfort. Real love is tested during pain, weakness, and difficult seasons of life. Because people who stay beside you when everything falls apart are the people who truly love you. And sometimes, losing the wrong person is the first step toward finding the right one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because some stories don't just make us emotional, they remind us what real loyalty actually looks like.